All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to the very first MKO show, where we're going to talk about optimizing your metabolism, but we're going to mean that in the grander scheme of things. We're going to talk about optimizing life, right? Because if you look up the word metabolism, it basically means all the processes required to sustain life. We're going to talk a lot about those things and ways that we can make those things better. But we're going to talk about life in the grander sense of things. We're going to talk about senses of accomplishment, goals, even happiness. So when we say optimize, we're talking about optimizing freaking everything. So welcome to the very first MKO show. I'm Earl Mann, and I'm going to be your host today. We have a very special guest today. I'm going to have him introduce himself, but Clark Henderson is going to be one of I'm going to call him our faculty, which we're going to have a very select few group of experts that are going to be our gatekeeper and conduits to many things. Clark has a background in nutrition. He supported functional medicine doctors. He specializes in high-end supplementation, and he's been to all the world's leading conferences on health, wellness, longevity, anti-aging, all of that cool stuff. So welcome to the broadcast, Clark.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, Earl. Just like what he said, I'm pretty passionate about trying to bridge the gap between some of the emergent science and the real world health applications we can go through and talk about here. Just like what he was talking about with the longevity conferences. I've gone to a lot of continuing education stuff on that. And my goal is really just to go through and try to bring that to the masses in a way that's distilled to where people can go through and understand it. And that's really how me and Earl met. And, that's how we're here on the podcast today.
Yeah, and so today, and we're going to try to keep these shows fairly short and to the point, kind of like cliff notes, if you will, for the curious, so that well, every now and again we might have a show that really sparks on something that you're super interested in, and then we invite you to go down that rabbit hole of self-knowledge and experience and find out what in the many, 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 many things that are now available to us to enhance our life's experience you choose to be your personal recipe. So, today when we were trying to figure out or decide what would be a good subject to start with, like what's the first thing we want to talk about? And that was a hard thing to do because there's so many things we're excited about, so many things that we use personally. But I saw a podcast once recently, Clark, and it was one of the major thought leaders in the whole biohacking, health, longevity space. And they had interviewed a handful of people, and they asked all these people a simple question of all the many things that you do, and they all did a lot of things, right? They like, if you could only do one or two things, what would that be? And the answer surprised me. A large majority of them said, the PEMF mat. I, I just have to keep the PEMF mat. At the point in time where I saw that interview, I didn't really understand what a PEMF mat was. I might have heard the term from here and there.
Of
Um,
course.
since then, we now have one, and I definitely know what it does, and I actually use it every day. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to focus in on PEMF technology. And Clark, if you would, I want you to treat this as if I don't know anything. And then let's just start from the very, very beginning. First, can you overview and describe for us what PEMF is?
Of course. So if you want to start with the basics, what it stands for is pulsed electronic magnetic frequency, or sometimes they call it PEMF. So, just like what you said, you've heard it within the biohacking space. I actually originally heard from it from a lot of the athletic teams one of my functional doctors work with. They'd been using PEMF technology to go through and try to get the athletes in better shape, starting at least as far back as the 2000s. And a lot of the original technology actually comes from NASA, believe it or not. What they found is we have this sphere of influence called the Schumann resonance around the Earth. And when they started sending astronauts up in outer space, they started realizing that they started having all these different health issues because they were no longer within that sphere of influence. We actually found out later on that they have the exact same issue if you go too far down underground, where you're no longer connected to that electromagnetic field. And this kind of it's a loose introduction, actually, some of the benefits of grounding. And so with pulse electronic magnetic frequency, what you're doing is you're mimicking the Schumann resonance. And if you think of the human body as a battery, think of the PEMF as essentially like you're recharging a battery. So what you're doing is you're going through, you're re-energizing all the cells in the body. All of the cells in the body now start functioning better. So you're going to go through, the cells are re-energized, the mitochondria is working better. Then you're going to increase how well nutrients are being absorbed. You're going to increase how well the body itself is going to go through and recover. You're also increasing how well the body detoxes. So one of the number one things I always talk about is after you use that kind of a therapy, you have to make sure you rehydrate, make sure you get all your minerals in there, and then you can stack it really well with a lot of other things. So if you have other modalities, different brainwave technology like brain tap, sound lounge therapy devices, red light therapy, anything like that, the PEMF devices work really well with them, and you can use them in conjunction at the same time.
So it sounds like a good mental model to have around what this is literally you are charging your cells with energy, not with
Correct.
nutrition, with actual energy.
Yep,
And the
exactly.
studies show the effect. So these are not so much theoretical as they are empirical now. There are reports that have been studied on the effect of PMF technology literally at the cellular level, correct?
Correct. Yeah, they have studies dating all the way back from NASA, I believe, starting roughly
Mhm.
about the 1960s or so.
Yeah.
And some of the history on that actually goes back even further. There are studies going back in the 1800s, even some early stuff to where it looks like the correlations you could link to PMF technology as far back as the 1700s. And essentially, what it really came down to is people just recognized that there's a different type of energy source that people could go through and they could connect with. They just didn't quite understand what the implications behind that were. And it was really kind of once you hit NASA in the 1960s where they were really able to go through and do a lot of different data and testing on that, that
Right.
they could really start proving that this is actually what the effect was. And then fast forward, roughly about 40-ish to 50 years, then, once it got involved in the biohacking space, athletes started using it, and then they started realizing that you could actually use it every day. That kind of changed the game and how a lot of people could actually access the technology.
That's great. So now that we understand a little bit, or at least a little bit more about what PMF technology is, let's talk about why it matters. Like why are we in a state where we need to re-energize ourselves? I know you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So if I go back over to my background, one of the fundamental things for me is always going to be nutrition. So if you dive back down into nutrition guidelines in terms of kind of what your RDAs would be, and where a lot of those nutrients are coming from, one of the first things I like to go through and reference is going to be some of your soil studies. So they've been doing soil studies early back into the early 1900s up until recent times. And some of the comparisons they started making is if you ate an apple that was an apple from 1950-ish, roughly. And you compared that against how much nutrients would be in an apple that you got off your store at Sprouts or Whole Foods today, to
Right.
go through and get the same nutrient value, you would have to eat almost 50 apples. You have to eat like a whole bag of
That is
apples. Now,
nuts.
I don't know about you, Earl, but I do not want to eat 50 apples in one day. I maxed out maybe two apples, and I don't think we're going to keep the doctor away going through and doing that. So
Right.
if I look at it from a nutritional perspective, everybody pretty much they're not hitting what they need to. If I start then comparing that against a lot of the dirty electricity, your EMF that's out there, that's causing a lot of people, with your 5G towers, they have studies showing that if you have Wi-Fi in the same room as you when you go to sleep at night, you're going to have a lot of different health issues stemming just from that. Versus this is kind of like on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you're going through and you're actually re-energizing the body with healthy, electromagnetic frequencies versus dirty electronic magnetic frequencies. And then if we're having nutrition issues, you can actually go through and start increasing how much nutrients you get out of the same, let's say theoretically, the food you're eating, or if you're taking supplementation, and actually increase how well you're going to absorb the nutrients from that at the same time. So that's kind of
Yeah,
one of the base levels I would look at.
yeah, I would also like you to talk just a little bit about one of the things I found most fascinating is just about the ability. We're electrical beings and we build an electrical charge, et cetera, but we walk around and are literally isolated, right? Our shoes separate us from the ground, the floor separate us from the earth. You want to talk a little bit about just,
Almost
at a high
definitely.
level, just the state of our universe, as you will, in terms of electrical starch, flight or flight, grounding, that whole thing, just quickly.
Course. So if you go through and start looking at the mechanics behind grounding, what a lot of it comes down to is normally people would have worn shoes that would have been connected to the earth through natural means. So, whether it's made by leather, some kind of maybe a natural plant product, but that was still connected to the earth. So once that changed is when we started going through and using rubber shoes. which essentially disconnected you from the energy of the earth. And that's why, if anyone's familiar on the podcast with grounding, that's where a lot of that technology started kind of coming from when they started making the grounding mats, the grounding pads. It's where they're trying to reconnect to the energy from the earth. So that's part of the Schumann resonance, and that's a frequency of roughly about 7.8. So that's our natural frequency to when we're connecting back to the earth, where you're just touching the ground, just with the soles of your feet. Now, on the flip side of that, what they have found is that you can go through and start looking at studies with water, just connecting back to the earth itself. You start activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So, what that means for people that might not know, what that means is we all have these theoretical tigers that are chasing us around all the time that are our stress response. So, back when we were cavemen and we were being chased by tigers, it was a fight or flight response, and that's how you had to, respond to survive. Now, the problem is that when somebody's following you and they honk their horn at you, you get a angry email from your boss, the kids did something they weren't supposed to, you're stressed out, but you still respond to that stress the exact same way. You still have
Yeah.
this metaphysical tiger that's chasing you.
Yeah.
So when you go through and you connect with these frequencies on the mat, what it does is it helps activate that system saying, hey, Earl, you're okay. There's no more stress. It's okay to let go of all those tigers. They're not there anymore. You can relax. And so once you go through and you activate that, you're going to activate your rest and digest system. The body feels like it's safe. And so sometimes, depending on what people need, they all react in different ways. I've seen people that have just passed out after 5 minutes on the mat at some of the trade shows I've gone to. I've actually heard some people where they actually start digesting their lunch better just because we
Hmm.
put them in a rest and digest state right there on the mat. Other ones just feel more of just a sense of calm. They're just like, hey, you know what? I just feel a lot better right now. Other people they're just hanging out. They're like, hey, you know what? I feel way more re-energized now. This is kind of like a nice little, 5 minute, 2 hour nap, and I'm okay with that. And so, kind of depending on where people are at, it meets them where they're at for that technology, which is really cool.
Yeah, Clark, one of the most eye-opening things I found out in my personal learning journey after I learned the incredibly destructive potential that stress could have on our biophysiology, our biology, our well-being is how persistent stress is. Most people think they're only stressed if they're angry or yelling or about to be attacked, or like you said, literally facing the tiger. But they don't
Correct.
realize that sitting in traffic, worrying about next week, next Wednesday, next year, next payday, worrying about the boss, worrying about what's going on in the economy, worrying about this thing they saw on the news, worrying about this family member, worrying about what's going on with their kids, worrying about the sound the car's making. All
Yep,
these things are little mini tigers, right? And,
exactly.
and and what I learned way back when I first learned about this whole fight or flight thing was that our bodies are really geared to when we ramp up those stress hormones, cortisol being one of them, we're meant to use it, right? Use it, I mean, use it in motion, use it in action, or run, fight or
Yep,
literally flight.
exactly.
But what we do is we ramp up those chemicals and we just leave it ramped up and we just go through our day. We don't burn it off. We can't find a way to get rid of it. So when you talk about the PMF ability to get you out of that state, that by itself has tremendous, tremendous health benefits. One more thing I want you to just touch on before we talk about the specifics of the mat that is our mat of choice. Can you just touch on just a little far infrared light, just kind of what it is a little, and just touch on some of the, why it matters.
Of course. So far infrared is an interesting tech. So you're just kind of looking at it's a light source that's going to be heat based. And so what we're doing with that is it's going to be a deeper tissue penetration. You're looking at a very specific frequency range, roughly between about 650 to about 800, I believe. Once you go through and you start doing that, you're actually going to go through and start helping the body heal itself. So the body's going to go through and start reacting to that light source because, as you said, we're beings of energy, right? So that is one of those specific light sources that match up with the body. And so once you go through and start doing that, it's going to have an anti-inflammatory effect. The body will go through and start trying to heal up tissue damage, regenerative. Some people actually almost feel energized after going through and using some of the infrared heat. So with that, when it stacks with some of the PEMF, they both work in tandem together. So you're having a stronger anti-inflammatory response. Muscles like to be warm. When muscles are warm, you're helping go through an increased blood circulation. And usually when you go through an increased blood circulation, if you have any nutrient deficiencies in some of those areas, it'll actually go through and help bring in nutrients. So a lot of times with my clients, I like to go through and stack where they might go through and take a supplement stack maybe half an hour before, and then go through and have them go through and do maybe an infrared, red light therapy, PEMF afterwards. That way they're
Yeah.
utilizing a lot of those supplements a lot better.
That sounds great. So that was a good lead in. So now let's talk about our PMF mat of choice. And I like this mat for a couple of reasons. Number one is I met the founders, and they're an unbelievable couple, really on a mission to change the world in a positive way. Let's start with that. But one thing, but they've also done something pretty unique with their mat in terms of stacking different technologies. So if you want to touch on what makes the Align PMF mat different in the space, I think that would be of interest to some people listening,
Oh,
checking
of
in.
course. So the difference with their mat compared to a lot of other ones is so one what they use is called OSRM, which just stands for it's a Schumann resonance mimicking technology. So what they're trying to do is if you go read some of those original NASA studies, they used what was more of a very forced PEMF wave and it has more of a geometric pattern. If you go through and you mimic the PEMF that's from the Earth itself, from the Schumann resonance, it's more of what they call a sine wave. It's a very smooth wave so the body actually utilizes that wave a lot better. There are different reasons as to why you might want to go through and use that other wave type. Sometimes if you need more of a force modulation, that would be an appropriate situation for that. But these use what's called ELF, and it's a much lower frequency within PMF to where essentially you can kind of use it as much as you want. Some of those higher end frequencies, there's going to be a point of diminishing returns. So if you use it too much, you can actually start causing problems within the body. This one, because it's such a low frequency, if you want to go ahead and just kind of lay on it on and off all day, you can't. Totally fine. Just make sure you rehydrate. If you want to use it for 20 minutes, totally fine, not a problem. So that's kind of one of their first key components. One of the next ones is what was interesting about their backstory is they went through and they essentially took apart just about any PEMF mat on the market you can possibly think of. They wanted to go through and see how they worked, how they didn't work, what they liked, what they didn't like, and what they wanted to add on top. And so one of the most common components they found that was missing is that none of the electricity coming in to go ahead and set up the frequencies was shielded. So they wanted to make sure that their mat was shielded. So any of the EMF coming off the wall from the outlet is now shielded once it gets to the mat. So you don't have any dirty EMF frequencies coming off of that that would then mess with the frequencies coming out of the mat itself. It uses 8 coils. And what those coils do is they create what's called a toroidal field. So the toroidal field is going to be roughly about 15 inches up off the top of the mat and 15 inches below the mat. So essentially, you are now within a sphere of influence up and down the mat that's going through and imbuing your body with those frequencies. And so if we go back to our grounding frequency at 7.8, what that means is you have 7.8 pulses per second that's going through your body, essentially energizing you from head to toe. So you can go anywhere between 1 hertz to 50 hertz. 1 hertz is going to be much more on the lower end of the frequency where we're almost trying to drop the body down into a theta brainwave, almost like we're trying to put you to sleep. 50 hertz is going to be more of kind of like an athlete, full recovery mode. They're going to be re-energized. Everything's trying to, be uptaken as fast as you possibly can, and you'd have 50 pulses per second for every cell there. One of the next things is that they stacked that technology on top of the infrared heat, like what we talked about before. So a lot of that works very synergistically. And then the last component they really did is they put every mat has 30 pounds of naturally sourced crystals. And so what the crystals do is the crystals have their own frequency that they're working with. When you turn the infrared heat on, the infrared heat actually helps the crystals release negative ions. So
Mm.
what you're doing is you're stacking negative ions with infrared heat with the PMF frequencies all at once. So you're running this beautiful stack of 3 different modalities all within one package. So in terms of just, if we're talking about biohacking, not everybody has, 2 hours to go through and try to go from this station to that station, let me do ozone, let me do red light, let me do PMF,
Mm.
whatever. So this is kind of a nice thing where you can go through and get 3 different modalities all for the price of one within just, one set time frame, which is great.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I'm rapidly understanding why the PMF mat or that technology is on the top of some of the thought leaders around the world and is rapidly becoming a hit here at Hydration Station, which is the headquarters of the MKO show. So this was great, Clark. I really appreciate you giving us some insight into PMF, what it's all about. Hopefully you people that find this show learned a little, or at least were intrigued enough to maybe go do some research on your own. If you're local here to Vegas and would like to try it out, just come on by HSLV or Hydration Station Las Vegas and give it a shot and try it. We currently invite you to do that. This is one of many, 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 should I say, many things we're going to be talking about. We have a list of some of our favorites. We have a list of some things that are trending. We have a list of some things that are just mind blowing in terms of sounds like it's science fiction, but we also take requests. So if there's something anywhere in the world of optimizing the human experience, drop us a note. If we know about it or know an expert about it, we will include it in one of our shows. And if we don't know about it, it might put it on our list of things we're constantly researching on our own. Both Clark and I are lifelong practical scientists. We explore, we try, we experience, and we see what we think about different modalities, what works, what doesn't. But we have a lot of things coming and we're excited about it. So, Clark, thank you so much. I look forward to having you on upcoming shows. And we'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to MKO Show #1. You guys have a great day.